Konnichiwa, Samurai James here. In this video, we're going to do the 10 questions for katana guys from Eric Husayn. Alright, welcome back to my channel. This is 10 questions for katana guys. I do consider myself a katana guy, of course, because I've clearly got katanas. I also like Japanese swords in general. I've also got a nodachi, as you can see here, as well as European swords, such as the one here in front of me. All of these are relevant to my 10 questions, and I'm going to make sure that I include a katana or Japanese sword in each of them, but I'm going to answer this from a perspective of as a sword guy. So, without further ado, let's start with question 1. Do you have any formal training? Now, unfortunately, I don't have any formal training in Japanese sword art specifically because there's simply nobody near me, and because of work schedule, I'm married, I have a kid, I can't be traveling extensively to go take swords classes for that, so unfortunately, no Japanese formal training. However, I did take about 5 years of consistent weekly training in HEMA, which included cutting classes once a month as part of that core focus, so I've done a pretty good amount of tatami cutting. Outside of those normal classes, I also did a HEMA-focused event, HEMA being Historical European Martial Arts, and I took a cutting class directly from Mike Edelson, who is very well known in the HEMA community. He is a very good cutter, and he actually got his start in Japanese martial arts, and then transitioned to HEMA. So, indirectly, I've been taught cutting from a person who has experience with Japanese martial arts, but in a European context. That gets even more interesting because my normal swords teacher in HEMA that I've been going to for 5 years consistently, and lately I haven't because HEMA and life, and I've had a baby and everything, but I still consider him my official teacher. He also started with Japanese martial arts, and he has done cutting with Japanese swords and everything, and at one point we actually got invited to a tournament, which was a cross-cultural type of tournament, where we did cutting competition that was open to European swords and Japanese swords, and that's part of my answer to question number 10. But that's question number 10. What's question number 2? So question number 2, what is currently your favorite katana? Well, if we mean katana in context of Japanese sword, that's going to be my 9260 Nodachi here. I ordered this customized from Katanas for Sale. I've cut with it numerous times. It's in a few other videos of mine if you want to get more of the details on it. It does have a bohi. It makes that beautiful sword whistling sound. I'm very, very happy with this sword, both in the appearance, the delivery time, the communication, cutting with it. Everything for that has been great for the most part. The Ito is starting to move just a little bit, but I've used it a lot, and I just consider that as a normal wear and tear thing. I don't think this would be a thing with a really, really high-end sword, but for the price I paid, I think that's fair. Now, if we're going to talk specifically within only the window of katanas, my favorite would be this one right here. This is the Kuramono, which means dark thing. It's got this engraved dragon on the blade, which I know you're thinking, Mall Ninja, ha 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 ha. And in most cases you would be correct for this. However, this was part of the original Sword Buyer's Guide run that they did 5 or 6 years ago when they tried to custom make 2 different types of katanas at a specific price point. I believe it was around $300. And it's got nice silver Manuki fittings here. The rest of the Fuchi, Kashira, the Suba is all blackened. It's black leather Ito wrap. It's black Samigawa and silver fittings. I just love the aesthetics of it. So if it had to be a favorite, specifically katana, definitely this one. Question number 3. What is the most expensive katana in your collection? Well, specifically within the realm of katanas, that's going to be my Cold Steel Warrior series right here. This was about $400. I bought it back in 2015, and for a long time, it was my favorite cutter. It was my go-to. If you've seen the Cold Steel videos, and I assume at least half of you have, they're shoving these things through like hoods of cars and doing all sorts of crazy cutting tests. So, I wasn't too worried about being able to damage it in any way. And when I was still learning some of the early aspects of cutting, I definitely felt comfortable with it. So it is not only one of my most familiar swords for cutting, it's also my most expensive. Now, if we expand outside of katanas and we simply say what is the most expensive sword in your collection, that's going to be my Albion Duke right here. This one is factory edge sharp. I have not sharpened it in any way, but price point comparison, the Cold Steel was $400 and this one was almost $1,100. So this is definitely my most expensive sword in my collection, but look at this beefy blade and everything. It's, it's a nice two-handed medieval style sword, so I'll have a different video about it later, but yeah, most expensive sword in my collection is this guy. Question 4, how often do you practice? Well, I used to do this on a weekly basis for HEMA, as I said earlier. With COVID and everything, that tapered down, and before COVID, I got married and my practice time cut back. Lately, it has been really sporadic because we also have a 20-month-old child, so between COVID and having a baby and certainly not wanting to go out and get sick and bring anything back and get the baby sick, I've only been to swords class, I think 3 times in 2021. It might have only been 2. I think I went a 3rd time but didn't fight or anything, so not a whole lot of practice for that. I have tried to get some cutting in, you know, when I can get time to get out to the park, do a little bit of bottle cutting and things like that, but there's the logistics of all that, so I do my cutting when I can, but it's definitely sporadic. Sometimes it's twice a week for a week or 2, and other times it's 2 months apart. Now question number 5, do you sharpen your own blades? I have sharpened a few European swords, but I have actually not sharpened a actual katana yet. I do want to sharpen my customized katana that I got from Katanas for Sale. In one of my other videos I was doing some cutting and I accidentally nicked a screw on the stand and it made a little small ding in the blade, so I do want to try to flatten that back out and sharpen it up and give it a nice good edge. The factory edge came serviceable but definitely could be sharper for cutting tatami, so that's next on my list. So haven't done it quite yet for a katana. I have done it for other swords and I have the tools to do it, so I'm just trying to make sure I do my proper research and try to sharpen the katana properly. So number 6, do you prefer differentially hardened or do you prefer through hardened? And this is very much personal preference on it, so you know, I fully expect to get some people saying, yeah, definitely me too, and some people saying, no, that's dumb, yeah, no. So I understand there's going to be a divide on that, and that's cool. That's why it's a preference. We all get to have our own preference, and there's no right or wrong on it. My preference for cutting, as the question says, I like through hardened. Like I mentioned, I've been using this cold steel for cutting for years. I've never bent it, had any other issues with it, and they are through hardened. That is not traditional for a Japanese style sword. They would be differentially hardened with the clay and, you know, using tamahagani and not 1055 steel like the cold steel is. But I find that it's just a little bit more resilient for cutting and something that you don't have to quite worry as much with damaging the sword with when you're doing the cutting if you have a through hardened blade. You certainly have to be careful either way so that you don't cut yourself, because like sharp sword is sharp sword. Doesn't matter if it's differential, doesn't matter if it's through hardened, doesn't matter, you know, in some cases even if it's stainless steel. Like sharp metal is just going to cut you, so make sure you're careful with it. Now for those of you who don't know what the difference between what through hardening or fully hardened or case hardening is versus what the differential hardening is, I do have a video that's going to talk about the different types of steels with katanas and why some are better than the others, the pros and cons of each, so keep an eye out for that in the next couple weeks. So question 7, what is your ideal suka length and why? Well, I've cut with a number of different katanas and I don't find any specific ideal length yet. Like I mentioned, the cold steel, that has been my go-to. I have not cut with the Kuramono, but you can see the handle lengths here are pretty close. This seems to be fairly standard in the 10 to 12 inch range. I haven't cut with any that I've considered as too short of a suka to get a good grip on, and I haven't cut with anything yet that had too much of a suka that I considered it to be getting kind of in the way. I have not been able to cut yet with my Nagamaki just due to the weather. Right now it's early January, there's actually snow on the ground, so I simply haven't had, you know, time and conditions to go out and plop and set up cameras and everything and do this. So, you know, that might be too far onto it with the giant handle like that, but you know, that's definitely an extreme and certainly wouldn't apply to a standard katana. So far 10 to 12 seems to be the happy range. Question 8, what is your favorite blade geometry style and why? Well, the standard Shinobi Zakuri, you know, this comes on, sorry, Shinogi Zakuri. This is almost every regular katana that we're going to be used to cutting with. It has the curvature to it. There are other blade types for Japanese styles, such as the straight double-bladed swords, and in some cases even a straight-bladed single-edged sword, but the standard katana style is the one I'm most familiar with. I do have a sharp tachi on order that I have not received yet that has a deeper sori, meaning that the blade will be more curved than a standard katana. I am curious how that's going to cut. I simply haven't had a chance to do it yet, but standard katana blade definitely my preference as far as a Japanese sword. Question number 9, do you name your swords? I'm not creative enough to name my swords and remember what the names of them would be. I'm getting old and I forget things, so I refer to it by whatever name the manufacturer happens to give it. In this case, the Albion Duke, or the Sword Buyer's Guide Kuramono, or the Cold Steel Warrior series. This one, since it was customized, doesn't really have a name that came with it, so I would say hand me the Nodachi with the gray Ito and the black Saya. So, not the most exciting answer. I'm pretty plain on that, but eh. Number 10, what is the best cut you've ever made, or the one that you're the most proud of? Well, this was actually with a European sword, and it was at a tournament called the PMAA Fall Brawl. It's what I mentioned at the beginning of this video, where it was open to both European and Japanese swords. Essentially, when we were doing the HEMA classes, we were sharing the dojo with a group that did Eastern martial arts. We had Sundays, they had Saturdays. They were invited to a cutting tournament, which had cutting forms and everything else. We were invited to that same tournament to do cutting competition for tatami cutting, and I entered into that. It was 3 rounds. It was one roll of tatami per round, and the forms that they had you do were something that you could do with both a Japanese style sword and a European style sword. So while a European sword has 2 edges, there were no patterns that involved cutting with the leading edge and then cutting with the reverse edge on the way back up. The first 2 rounds of this I actually have the video of, and they're here on my channel. I didn't publish when I posted them because they were from back in like 2015, and you know, just didn't seem like overwhelming everybody with that. But I unfortunately didn't get the 3rd round to it because of technical difficulties. The 3rd round was something called a wheel cut. That's where you make your initial overhead descending cut, and you come back and you cut again, but you don't pause in between. You have to cut, return, cut. So you don't get a lot of time to stop, to think, to measure, to do anything else. And for this round, it's a full tatami roll, and I went right hand, right hand. Great. Then you have to reverse, and then left hand, left hand. And I finished all 4 cuts, clean cuts through the mat, and I was like, okay, well, I had a little bit of mental hesitation on that 4th cut with the second side from the left, and as I went left side and then left side again, I thought, I don't think I have enough mat to get through, but whoosh, and I made it through. Great. I didn't think I was going to do it. I thought I was going to hit the peg. So thank you, salute, bow, step back. And when I looked at it afterwards, the judges came over to me. They said, okay, James, that cut you just did, you ended up hitting the peg. And I said, wow, I didn't even feel it hit the peg. And they said, just so you understand, you hit the peg, we have to penalize you. But also, just so you know, you cut cleanly through the peg. And that was one of the coolest things we have ever seen. Especially because in the first round, one of the Eastern guys ended up bending his katana on the first mat. So, yikes, I felt so bad for that guy. He had to go the next 2 rounds after trying to straighten it back out, which again goes to why, you know, through hardened versus deferentially hardened. But that was definitely my coolest cut ever, just right through the tatami mat and a 1-inch hardwood dowel, just like butter, just whoosh, just like cutting regular tatami. I thought that was the coolest thing ever, and I actually kept the piece of mat that had the peg cut off in it, but it is tatami, and after a while it started to sink, so I did end up tossing it out, and unfortunately that was, 6 years ago, so I don't have it. But definitely the coolest thing ever, cutting through a tatami mat and a 1-inch peg without any hesitation. Nice clean cut, no damage to the sword either, and it was a sword that I'd sharpened, so hey, bonus on that, made me feel extra special. I also won first place at that cutting exhibition too, so that was great. But that's my 10 questions, and I'm going to tag some people, and here we go. Well, that's my answers to the 10 questions. Appreciate the tag and the shout out from Samurai Byrd. Congrats on your channel blowing up lately, buddy. You've been doing good work, and I'm glad to see you succeeding like that, so that's awesome. Appreciate the tag and shout out. That's going to be it for this video. This is Samurai James saying thanks for watching, and sayonara.